Housing affordability is the battleground of this Australian election, and boy, are we seeing the reality of the warning from former US President Ronald Reagan that the 9 most dangerous words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." But I'd love to tell you that all the lavish spending being promised by both of our would-be winners, current Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, would actually make things better this time. But in truth, all they're doing is tripling down on the very things that made housing unaffordable in the first place. Buckle up, because these dollar figures are eye-watering, the waste is gobsmacking, the dishonesty is off the scale, and on current evidence, the electorate are lapping it up. But what I see this election is a Hunger Games-style overlord gleefully watching the peasants fight each other to the death for these deliberately scarce houses. My name is Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to understand the world as it changes around us. Australia is in a housing crisis. That is pretty clear. There is not enough supply to keep up with demand in established housing, new housing builds, or even in rentals. And our politicians are lining up to make grand promises all about how they are going to make housing affordable by spending more of our money than ever before. Politicians love nothing more than when the voting public are in pain, because there is no faster way to get elected than to make empty promises about how you're going to take away their pain. By lightening their wallets, of course. If you want to see how this works, just look at all of the promises that have already been made about fixing the cost of living, and the cost of electricity in particular. How is that working out for us? Empty promises made to get votes, but not to be delivered on. The truth is that politicians don't benefit from fixing our problems, they benefit from promising to fix our problems, and then failing to deliver so that they can repeat the same empty promises next time. It is a political stairway to heaven, with each progressive cycle of promises followed by more taxes and more power so that they can deliver on those promises, you understand. Followed by failure, of course. Followed by more promises. Each cycle is another step up their stairway to heaven and another circle around our drain down to hell. Just as the drug companies don't benefit from a patient actually being healed, so our politicians don't benefit from housing actually becoming affordable. And they certainly don't want the cost of housing to come down. Heaven forbid, that would be a disaster for them personally, because 95% of federal politicians own at least one property. And federal politicians are 3 times more likely to own an investment property than a typical Australian. So our politicians have a vested financial interest in keeping the housing bubble going. For example, according to their declarations of interest, on the Labor Party side, Anthony Albanese owns investment property, as well as at least 11 other sitting members of the Labor Party, including Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek, Treasurer Jim Chalmers, and a bunch more that I've missed as well. On the Liberal side, Peter Dutton recently sold his investment property, and a dozen or more of his Liberal colleagues still have theirs. To put the scale of this protect the house prices problem in perspective, federal politicians between them are reported to own more than 2.2 properties each on average. Now, to their credit, the political leadership have actually admitted quietly that they don't want property prices to come down, even while they're making grand promises to fix the crisis. Anthony Albanese has stated that in Australia, quote, prices tend to rise, end quote, and instead of then saying that he wanted to change that, he said that he wanted people to have access to home ownership. His choice to mention the rising prices, but then to not suggest bringing them down, but rather go on to announce subsidies for first homebuyers so that they can keep up with the ever-rising prices, strongly indicates that Anthony Albanese does not want housing prices to come down. Labor's Housing Minister Claire O'Neil is quoted as having said on Triple J Radio, "Our goal is not to reduce the price of housing in Australia." On the Liberal side, Peter Dutton was explicit in his statement earlier this week that he wanted a steady increase in house prices. Now, there are good macroeconomic reasons why they would want that to happen from their point of view. But we need to keep that in mind as we review all of their housing promises from both of the major parties for this election. Because in my opinion, This explains precisely why their housing policies that they are saying will help with the cost of housing and help with the housing crisis are actually going to make house prices higher, way higher. They're going to make the situation worse. Here we go. Starting with the current Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's promises. Promise number one, $10 billion for 100,000 homes. Now, parts of this policy make absolutely no sense. For example, that's only $100,000 per home. So, unless they're building homes for ants, then this assumes that the buyers of these homes can still qualify for mortgages because obviously the house is costing a lot more than just that 100,000 that the government's putting in. But governments can't build homes. Builders build homes. So either they're taking builders away from existing builds in the free and highly competitive market to pay them uncompetitive government contract rates to build these homes, or what? Where are these builders coming from? Taking resources out of the private sector and putting them onto government projects is a surefire way to get less homes built, not more. But this policy does have a silver lining, which actually does point the way to a real solution if only the Labor Party would acknowledge it. And that is that they're going to pressure state and territory governments to fast track land release and planning approvals, which is actually a great idea. Simplify, speed up, strip the red tape and the green tape out of developing and building. That has a chance to actually do some good. But then they need to stop there. All this other stuff, the $10 billion of the government built houses, that is just productivity destroying nonsense that is guaranteed to make the situation worse. Okay, promise number two. Labor have also extended their loan guarantee program to all first home buyers, allowing them to buy their first home with just a 5% deposit. Now, this will work in the sense that it will give first home buyers a slight leg up when they're bidding against others to buy their first home. But think that through for 2 seconds. What happens when an entire cohort of buyers can suddenly bid higher than before? Prices go up. Now, this will work in the sense that it will increase the proportion of first home buyers, but it will do it whilst directly causing prices to rise even further. Promise number three, support for housing supply and construction. Now, this is another thing that looks good on paper, but it doesn't work in reality. The program is multifaceted, but it includes a near $1 billion allocation for investment into productivity, particularly prefab and modular construction models, which sounds great, right? Except that if such an investment made sense at this moment in time in Australia, then the private sector would already be falling all over itself to invest that money and to reap the rewards on the other end so that they can increase their profits. So we can be sure, because the private sector isn't making these investments, that the government money invested will not come back in benefits. If this was profitable, if this was beneficial, the private sector would be all over it. So what we're actually doing is taking some of the cost of construction and taking it off the home buyers and the builders, and we're putting it onto the general taxpayer, including, by the way, the taxpayers that cannot actually afford to buy their own home. This is regressive tax policy. Again, there is a silver lining in this one because they've included plans to cut red tape for building certifications, which is a good thing. But again, just do that. Just get the government out of the way. Let the private sector decide if prefab and modular homes are really actually a more efficient way to provide housing. You don't have to spend billions of taxpayers' dollars on efficiency when that efficiency is defined by government and not by the industry that actually knows what efficiency is. All right, there's other promises from the Labor Party as well, but those are the major announcements, and none of them are going to help with the cost of housing. There's a few good things in there, but taken as a whole, this is a disaster. And in my opinion, that is a feature and not a bug. Because even their promises to build more houses are just going to take the supply away from the private sector. They're going to use those builders less efficiently. And by the way, the government is going to have to give itself permission to ram through faster approvals, get more land released, to build to lower standards and higher densities. So all they actually have to do is change the rules that restrict the private developers and builders, and then they will deliver all of those products. They will deliver all of that housing faster and cheaper than the government program ever will if the government gets out of the way. The problem is the interventions, and the only solution that will help is to get the government out. Okay, that's the Labor Party. Now, Peter Dutton and his Liberal Party promises. The big ticket item is the $5 billion housing infrastructure fund, which will move the cost of basics like roads and sewerage, etc., off the developers and onto the taxpayers. Once again, onto all Australians, including the ones that cannot afford to buy a home of their own. All Australians will now be subsidising the buyers who benefit under this scheme. Now, this is a common theme with government programs, by the way. They are often deeply regressive, punishing the poor to help someone who is less poor. This does not save money, it just makes someone else pay, and often the someone else is someone in a worse position financially. Promise number 2. Dutton does at least deserve some credit for raising the issue of all of the over-the-top building codes in Australia. He's promised a review because of issues like the roughly extra $60,000 which has been added to the cost of a typical new build because of energy efficiency standards alone. I've covered this before, and this is probably one of the few things in this video that is actually a good idea out of all of them. And this is literally the only one so far that is going to make housing cheaper. Review the building codes, get rid of all the non-safety stuff. All the optional stuff needs to be out of the codes and up to the buyer and builder to decide what they actually want to build and buy. Promise number 3, the Coalition are promising bans on foreign ownership and reduction in immigration, which will be very appealing to many voters, but it is a band-aid at best. Here's the bitter truth. Australia would be in what we would consider to be a housing crisis, even without immigration being what it is. And we know that that's true because we've been talking about the issue of housing affordability for 30 years, since long before immigration took off the way that it is now. Has the immigration rate made it worse? Sure. But don't for a second buy this idea that ending immigration is going to make housing actually affordable. Our housing crisis is homegrown, caused by planning laws, building codes, red and green tape, and government interventions, taxes, fees, tariffs at every level. Get rid of immigration, and all of these homegrown issues remain. So don't view immigration as anything more than a band-aid on a cancer. It might hide the ugliness for a little while, but it won't fix the festering problem underneath. Promise number 4, and it's the last one I'll cover, is actually the most interesting of them all. Dutton's proposal to make housing tax deductible for first home buyers. Now, it's a limited scheme, making the interest payments on the first $650,000 of their home loan tax deductible for the first 5 years, as long as they remain living in that house. Now, this is a considerably less bad policy than all of the others, with the exception of cutting red tape, which is by far the best of the entire bunch. And that's because this policy is not going to have the effect of driving up the purchase price. It has the effect of reducing the holding costs. So it's probably only the second policy out of all of the announced policies which might actually have the promised effect of making housing more affordable. In this case, not the purchase price affordable, but the holding costs, and only for a very specific group of people. But I've said for a long time that the cost of housing should be tax deductible for everyone. Interest payments on your home loan and rental payments for renters should be tax deductible in full, even on your own home. Now, lots of people get upset about negative gearing, which is where costs are tax deductible for investors. And they say negative gearing should be abolished. And I completely disagree. It should be extended to include your own home as well. So the bottom line is this. Neither of our major parties really actually understands the problem at its core. The problem is government, and it goes away almost instantly if federal and state governments simply get out of the way. Abolish or massively streamline things like zoning, development applications, things like just simplify all the non-safety building standards to make low-cost housing actually a thing again, and allow the existing free market to solve all of the other problems. Right now, the government is trying to help by getting more involved. More schemes, more subsidies, more inefficient diversions of builders away from private sector into government sector boondoggles. Now, I'm sure they'll love it because they'll make a fortune. But that's precisely the problem. Governments always end up spending more to accomplish less. They destroy productivity. And finally, they claim to be helping by simply shifting the costs from the group that benefits from owning a home onto taxpayers who don't even get the benefit. If I had to pick a winner between the two, Labor and Liberal Party, I would say that the Liberal Party policies are less perverse. They will do less harm. But neither of these policy packages deserves to be called good. and neither of them will actually fix the underlying problem of government intervention making housing unaffordable, which means that their promises will fail, and at the next election we'll be right back here doing it all over again, just like we were at the last election and the one before that. Remember that definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? Well, these political parties are promising to keep doing even more of what's not working. Were you a fan of Charlie Brown? I was, as a kid, read all the time. Remember Lucy fooling Charlie into trying to kick the football? And then she'd always whip that football out of the way every single time, just as Charlie thought that he was going to kick that ball at last. Well, that's us. We're Charlie Brown. The politicians, they're Lucy. And the football, that's their promises to make things better. It's an illusion. It's a game to them. All they want is for us to keep playing, to keep coming back, to keep trying to kick that ball, to keep believing that it's different this time. It isn't. It's the same insanity all over again, and it will stay this way until we, the Australian people, wise up and change the rules of the game. Because for as long as we allow ourselves to be bought with empty promises, spending our own money, then we will keep falling for it. Which means that it's actually us. We're the ones who are insane. What do we do about it? Well, I suggest the first thing you do is look up the freedom-friendly minor parties. That's parties like the Libertarians, parties like One Nation. There's other great parties out there as well. Have a look at their housing policies. And there you will find some actually good ideas that might actually solve this problem. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I am 100% viewer supported. I don't get paid by anyone, not by any of the political parties that I've mentioned, no lobby groups, no campaign organizations. I have no advertisers, no sponsors, nothing. I am completely independent. I say what I think, and I think what I say. And if that sounds like your kind of thing, then please support my work by heading over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com to buy my books, to buy my merch, DVDs, my course, and in the process, you'll be helping me to keep doing what I do. Thanks for watching to the end. Please like, comment, subscribe, check out this recommended video here, and as always, stay free. Authorized by Topher Field for Topher Field at Topher Field Studio.